In our data set, we've had over 2,000 responses. The first part, we asked patients about what was their drive and motivation before TRT. We're also seeing how patients who are on treatment are now waking up and wanting to do things again. And what we did was we asked basically standard frequency-based mood questionnaires. When you improve the physiology, when you improve the testosterone, many men do report feeling more emotionally stable. So many men say, I feel like myself again, or the way I should be feeling. So where do we place our expectations? Most men don't wake up one day and think, I need more testosterone. They wake up thinking, why am I exhausted all the time? Why do I have no drive? Why does everything feel harder than it used to? And why don't I feel like myself anymore? Today, I'm going to show you what actually changes on TRT. And we'll be using real data from 2,000 patients who we surveyed and how their responses have influenced their results. So this isn't hype. They're not cherry-picked before and after photos. This is real data from real patients on how they've responded to testosterone therapy at different time points, starting at 6 weeks up to 6 months. So when men come to us, they rarely complain about low testosterone. They say, I don't feel motivated. I've lost my edge. My confidence isn't what it used to be. Sex feels different. I'm just flat. That's why our survey just doesn't ask about libido. It asks about how their work performance is, their motivation, their energy, their training capacity, their mood, if they have anxiety, or if they have a sexual reliability. Because testosterone can vary. It's not just about function. So in our data set, we've had over 2,000 responses, and we looked across 2 surveys, and we analyzed that about 294 of these patients were pre-TRT. So basically, we have a baseline before they started testosterone therapy. About 182 of these patients were then between day 0 and 6 weeks. 278 of the data were around 6 months, and 461 were patients who have been on testosterone therapy between 1 and 2 years, and a whopping 641 patients have been on treatment beyond 2 years. So this isn't just a honeymoon snapshot, right? When you first start the treatment, you think, oh, in my honeymoon phase, everything is great. It's actually long-term data on a whole different subset of patients. So let's get into it. So this is a timeline. The first part, we asked patients about what was their drive and motivation before TRT. Before TRT, 85% of patients reported a lack of motivation, and 70% said their work performance had deteriorated, and 81% said they felt grumpy and or sad more often. Now here's where it gets interesting. At around 6 weeks into treatment, the motivation problems dropped to about 39%, and their work performance issues dropped to 16%, and the sad or grumpy response dropped to 22%. So by 6 months, we looked at the data. The motivation questions, right, deterioration at work, motivation to do the gym, is now down to 26%. Their work performance issues down to 13%, and their mood complaints down to 18%. So this is the first transformation. It's not about just their abs and them getting in shape. It's about their drive. And these questions might sound familiar because these are questions from the Adams questionnaire that we've asked them. Not only are we asking real data, but we're also wanting to look at, we're also seeing how patients who are on treatment are now waking up and wanting to do things again. Things that they were putting off, things that they weren't interested in, they're getting that desire back. So before we get into the next part of the story, I want to ask if this kind of data-driven breakdown is helpful. If you find it helpful, why not considering subscribing to the channel now? That would really be helpful so we get more content and information out like this. Most TRT content online is either bro science or fear-based, and we want to show you, especially in this video, the timeline, the risks, and the realities of TRT. Right, now let's talk about sexual confidence that our patients had prior to going into TRT and then after TRT. So we measured 5 things: libido, erection, confidence, ability or reliability of penetration, and sexual satisfaction, followed by morning erections. Obviously, sex isn't just about the desire, it's also about being consistent and being able to have libido and erections when you want. So before TRT, libido average score was about 1.9 out of 5, so on the lower end of the spectrum. And erection confidence averaged around 2.37. At 6 weeks, libido then climbed, that we saw in the results in an aggregate of the patients in there, from 1.9 out of 5 to 3.1 out of 5. So we're seeing a slight increase in libido, and their confidence to maintain or achieve an erection slightly bumped up from 2.37 to 3.3. Now, at 6 months, libido increased a bit further to 3.2, and confidence to 3.5. That's a full 1 point jump on a 5-point scale. Now, when we're looking at the reliability of the erections, basically we're talking about penetration reliability. They were 3.07 before TRT. 6 weeks in, what to expect? 3.89 of reliability for the erections, enough to do penetration, and 4.08 at 6 months. It's a big difference. I mean, it's a difference between will it work tonight, or I'm not even going to think about it anymore. And that's important, because it's a mental shift that matters. And if you're thinking about starting TRT, obviously we're looking at the aggregate of data, but if you're thinking about starting TRT, this can make a difference. And again, the data from our BMH group shows that this makes a difference. So another area when you're low on TRT, or when you're looking at TRT, is how your mood and anxiety rank, and how they improve or don't improve. And what we did was we asked basically standard frequency-based mood questionnaires. It's not because TRT is an antidepressant, but it's because low hormones often affect your mental health and your mental stability. Low testosterone sometimes is linked with higher depression scores and sometimes higher anxiety scores. So some of the mood symptom index that we used, we ranked patients, they were around 7.2 before starting TRT. So essentially you want to see these numbers go down whilst you're on TRT. So that was their mood symptom score, kind of if they were down, if they were low mood, etc. Now at 6 weeks, 3.25 at 6 weeks. So in the first 6 weeks, you say, what can I expect? Well, mood actually improved from our data, for a cohort of data. And then it further improved at 6 months to 2.96. When we looked at anxiety questions, essentially these questionnaires, the standard GAD-7 questionnaire that's used in psychiatry, again, it was 6.9 anxiety before starting TRT, and 3.1 at 6 weeks, and then further down to about 3. So again, in half. So that doesn't mean TRT treats depression, but it does mean that when you improve the physiology, when you improve the testosterone, many men do report feeling more emotionally stable, so much more stable in their mood, both depression scores as well as anxiety scores. Now, the long-term question, right? Here's what separates real medical TRT from some of the online hype. Do these symptoms last? So we looked at 6 weeks, we looked at 6 months. Do they really last beyond that? Or is this just a little blip or a honeymoon period? So again, we have 641 responses of patients who've gone beyond 2 years on treatment. And what we found was libido remains constant. The score, it dropped down to 3.3. Confidence remains around 3.5, and penetration reliability remains around 4.1. We have the graph up here, so you can see. This isn't a short little spike. For many men, it stabilizes, and that's the point. Testosterone treatment stabilizes the longer that you're on it. It's not always a 100% decline to nothing, but you see the big drop, and then it's stable. So where do we place our expectations? Here's the honest truth. The biggest early changes are usually energy, drive, mental clarity, and sexual confidence. Body composition, like bone density, does take longer to achieve. Muscle may take longer than just 6 weeks to build. Metabolic changes are more long-term, but when you pull away the testosterone in these cases, many of those positive metabolic changes tend to go away, where men will report having more abdominal fat if they were to stop their testosterone treatment. But what's interesting is the psychological shift often comes first, and that's what we're seeing in our own cohort of patients in our study. And that's why so many men say, I feel like myself again, or the way I should be feeling. So if you're considering TRT, start with blood work, start with a proper assessment, don't guess. If you're in the UK or Europe, come to Balance My Hormones. And if you want a deeper dive into side effects, estrogen management, sleep changes, or body composition timelines, comment part 2 below, and we'll build it from the data that we have. And if you found this video helpful, please do subscribe, because this is how we do TRT and TRT education properly. And don't forget to check us out on Spotify, where we also have this information posted.